What is driving the real estate inventory crisis? And Americans are cashing out home equity by refinancing their mortgages, even if it means they're paying higher interest rates, and it's costing them absolutely 100%. It's costing them. I'm in the lovely Tulum right now with a gorgeous backdrop. Hey, it's all about growth, 100%. So today I want to talk about the inventory crisis in the United States and transition into cash out options. On cash outs, people will either love them or they hate them. I'm in the middle. It depends on your situation. Someone asked me, Tim, why do you write this stuff down? Well, I like to go through the data, everything I analyze, and I write it down, and then I rewrite some of it. And it just helps me get it in my noggin, and I think add credibility to my arguments. I could memorize it like a dialogue. I can remember up to 48 minutes of dialogue, no problem. But this is teleprompter free. I'm not reading off a teleprompter, and I just like to write it down and look at a page. It's the way I like to do it, you know? So that's why. So let's get into it. Since last March, we have been in a pandemic. Businesses have been shutting down. People are losing their shirts, their jobs, and life is grinding to a halt. Why has there not been a flood of distressed sales and foreclosures? It's still early, people. It's still early. However, demand for homes skyrocketed and prices shot up 10% year over year. It just wasn't about demand and prices, though. It was about inventory. We had an inventory issue before the pandemic, and we have moratoriums going on. So it's early. In a normal market, we would have over 1 million single-family homes for sale in February. This year, we're down to just 1/3 of the normal levels, and there's not enough homes available to keep up with demand. And that's the deal right now. And, you know, we don't have enough homes to keep up with demand. And here's the pearl. Today's inventory crisis is the greatest challenge the U.S. real estate market has faced since the mortgage bubble busts. And we all remember that. So what's driving this? Even the most diligent home buyer, well-financed, armed with an aggressive buyer's agent, and of course, real-time marketing analytics has even a shot at these homes. Now it depends. Homes under $1 million, 2 to 700,000, you're seeing multi-offers. Homes over 1.5 million are sitting. You're seeing price cuts. It depends. But that $1 million or less market, you're seeing multi-offers on homes. People are waiving contingencies. They're waiving appraisals. They're out of their minds, in my opinion. They're paying over asking big time. Here's my advice. And I'm on the commercial real estate side too. Been for years. People on the residential side are more emotional. People on the commercial side are more analytical. They're talking about cap rates. And they're looking at what it's going to do for their overall portfolio. They're not looking at the exterior and saying, oh, this is a lovely home, what have you. It's all about the bottom line. And never love anything like it. I'll sell my primary residence tomorrow for the right price. I don't love it. I don't care. It's all about the money. And, you know, people are more emotional on the residential side. And you can't be that way. I found this house when I was looking for another one. That's the attitude you have to have. Else you're going to get ripped off. And I'm very concerned. I would never pay over asking for a home. I would walk. Never. I would wait and hold out. So how do we get here? You know, the situation isn't just pandemic related, as I talked about earlier. We started 2020 with record low inventory, and it only dropped from there. In fact, the inventory crisis has been a decade in the making by driving some major trends. And number one, what do you think it is? We know the number one trend. It's low interest rates. Ultra cheap money is driving both increased demand and decreased supply. When rates are low, it becomes very inexpensive to keep my first property, which is what I did for investment income when I buy a new home rather than selling. And that's what people are doing. Homeowners are doubling up, buying but not selling. And you know why? You know, you got cheap money, and you analyze the data. You may not have a mortgage or low mortgage. Your LTV is real low, and you're like, hey, I can get cash flow on this property. I'll just buy another one. So people are doubling up. And that's also coupled with big institutional, and this is a big one. Big institutional investments in single-family rental properties over the past decade is the reason 7 million previously resaleable properties have now shifted into the rental market. That's happened during the housing crash. $36 billion of real estate, big institutional investors came in and swooped it up. There's articles right now of gentlemen with 3,000 units, investor groups, and they have tenants that are not paying. They're distressed. They're selling some of their assets. And the low-end guys that I know are selling some of their assets. So when we talk about this, the pain is just starting. We're in a moratorium. 5+ million homes are in forbearance, not 2.5. It's more than that. and there's a rental moratorium going on. The pain is just starting. I know people in businesses that have, gentleman in Mercedes told me I covered my employees for 2 weeks, multiple dealerships, $17 million it cost them. This is hitting rich people too in certain sectors. And, these investor groups, I'm telling the Wall Street landlords are chomping at the bit. I think there's going to be some great buys coming up, and I'm holding out. Don't get emotional, okay? The pain is just starting. The pain is just starting. So ultra low interest rates, as long as they stay low, the madness will continue. But we can't keep them low forever. The only time in the decade we saw inventory climb year over year was when the mortgage rate spiked from 3.7 to 4.8% in the latter half of 2018. So what's the second driver? Buy low and sell never. During the past decade, the real estate holdings cost plummeted, income on properties climbed, innovations like Airbnb with an explosion of alternative dwelling units, ADUs, meant that single-family homes are much more likely to generate positive cash flow than ever before. Bottom line is, it's been an excellent decade for real estate. Like I've always said, the stock market's like water, real estate is like boulders. I want to touch and feel my property. I don't want to have to drive to Apple and touch their building. I do believe in the stock market, but real estate and cash flow is what it's all about. However, I know friends that are heavy in the stock market and they do a phenomenal job. I love the stock market, don't get me wrong, but they do a job and they try to come over to the real estate side and they can't deal with tenants and property managers and maintenance. They can't deal with it. It's just not in their wheelhouse, and they dump it and get back into the stock market, and they're doing very well. But it's not for everyone. But I like to drive to my building and go, oh, look at that. Look what I accomplished. Isn't that wonderful? Let me touch my house. Let me meet my tenant and collect my rent. I like that. It feels good. So buy low and sell never. And, Airbnb, they're taking your 30% of your money. You got to find other outlets for that. Underbuilding. The hangover from the bubble bust, 12 years ago meant that home builders built half as many homes for most of the past decade and are now only just kind of catching up to pre-construction levels. Kind of getting normal, but they're still behind the 8 ball. So underbuilding, the bottom line is that the phenomenon limited the growth of housing supply and exacerbating the effect of low interest rates on existing supply. So it's just it's an iconic twist the underbuilding has brought to the market. And also would-be sellers are afraid to sell because there's nothing to buy that they like. So we need to get those construction crews going again and amping up, but underbuilding's an issue. When we look at another issue, another trigger event, demographics. We're now into the millennial era. Millennials have a solid 5 to 10 years of millennial demand in front of us. And the time for boomers have inexpensive mortgages for years, and they've held on to their homes much longer than previous generations. So that's interesting. And I've seen stats where 17% said millennials are just going to stay as renters. But the demographics is an interesting statistic, and it's a valuable one, and it is affecting the inventory crisis. So we also talk about homeowner-focused policy. This is key. The CARES Act foreclosure moratorium has kept some properties from coming to market, staying instead in the hands of distressed owners. But the foreclosure pipeline was pretty low before the pandemic hit, and Americans have gained $1 trillion of home equity since then. Americans are house poor. All their money's in the house. They have no cash. So as a result, the pandemic distressed homeowners seem unlikely to add to our inventory anytime soon. But we have a lot of people in forbearance. We have a lot of landlords that are distressed. I said the pain is just starting. But we'll see what the government does. We've had these massive bailouts of 1.9 trillion, the CARES 2.5, over 2 trillion of the CARES Act. So this takes time, and I'm really worried about this. It's not as worrisome as the housing bubble bust and the subprime mess, but it is worrisome. We need to keep an eye on this, and keep an eye on our policymakers and the default rates. But I'm seeing default rates massive across the country. The policymakers, I would say overall, have been focused on keeping people in their homes. It's just what's going on. Gavin Newsom and the foreclosure issue here, read about that, and Gavin Newsom going to pick up those foreclosures. So What's going to help us emerge from this crisis? Most important factor is mortgage rates. As rates fluctuate over time, look to probably 3.5 to 3.7 to be a benchmark when consumers start feeling the pinch of higher payments. Isn't that sad? We think 3.5, 3.7 is a high rate. We're so spoiled right now. So look to that benchmark. They start ticking up, and they're ticking up a little bit. We need the construction to climb. The good news is that in this crisis, as I said, Americans have gained $1 trillion in wealth. Even those most tragically affected have been able to stay in their homes for the time being and benefit from large equity increases. So there's still tremendous demand waiting to be unlocked, and it could create the conditions to do so and weather the storm. So we'll have to see with that. That transitions nicely into cash outs. Should you do it? I think we need to look to the past to move forward. So let's go look to the past a little bit. Nearly 60% of cash out refinancing in 2018 came with higher interest rates, bigger share since before the financial crisis, according to the Wall Street Journal, citing mortgage data from Black Knight. I love Black Knight. They're great. And that's the key. You do a cash out, you're going to have a higher interest rate, unless you really know how to hammer them. I was able to get a lower interest rate. And I did a cash out on one property in the last 6 months. And I'll tell you why in a second. But, if you're going to do a cash out and use it like people did as ATMs back in the day for vacation properties and go to the Maldives for $100,000 and blow it out for 2 months and buy a Lambo, you're making a huge mistake. What happened in the crisis today, that's what happened in the past, and they use it as an ATM. Going forward, I called 40 lenders during the pandemic, and in last March, lenders all of a sudden tightened up, said you got to have a 700 FICO score and 20% down. Some lenders did not allow cash outs. They said you got to have 250,000 liquid. I talked to over 40 plus lenders. I did a video on this. Other lenders didn't care. Oh yeah, we'll do cash out. But that's the key. Your cash out, you might have a higher interest rate. So I would make the argument that people got cash outs today, and of course, compared to 2018, their interest rate, was okay. They got a lower interest rate, but the cash out rate usually is going to be higher. So how much did they lower their interest rate by? And then coupled with the fact, what are they using that money for? So let's just dig a little deeper. To some homeowners, it's worth it because payments is still lower than if they tapped a credit card or home equity line of credit. A big chunk of cash out refinance was due to debt consolidation, specifically paying off home equity lines of credit and by rolling it into a first lien mortgage. So if you're consolidating some debt, it makes sense. But Americans are cash poor right now, and you're just adding to your debt. You're adding to your debt load. Yes, it's a 30-year low interest rate mortgage. You increase the debt on your mortgage. What are you using that cash for? If you're paying off some debts, and like I said, you're not buying cars. But Americans are adding to their debt load now more than ever. Okay, so and I'm just going to say it again. Remember the people using their homes as ATMs before the housing crash for vacation, cars, debts consolidation. But the volume in recent years, here's the good news, is not as close. It's not even close to that. But should we be worried? Yes. Yes, we should be worried. There is an uptick. So in 2006, when home prices peaked, owners tapped a record $348.4 billion of home equity, combining cash out, refinance, and consolidation of HELOC debt, according to Freddie Mac. Now, check this out. Let's talk about the current numbers. This is crazy. This is the big time numbers. 4.3 trillion in mortgages were originated in 2020, with 2.8 trillion in refinances and 1.5 trillion in purchases, loans, largest volume since 2005. U.S. homeowners cashed out 153 billion in home equity last year, a 42.1% increase from 2019. 42% increase from 2019. So that's a lot. U.S. homeowners cashed out 153 billion in home equity last year, a 42% increase from 2019. People are using their cash to live on, increasing their debt load. on their mortgages. I think some of those people, if they're using the money wisely to consolidate debt or put a cash account reserve because they're nervous, and there's those people there, that is smart. That is smart. That makes sense. You know, the takeaway, millions are house rich, but cash poor. Wall Street landlords are ready. Ooh, they're chomping at the bit. And as an investor, I'm chomping at the bit. Yes, I am. Remember this. Remember this. For every 1% interest rates go up, and everyone knows this in the business, home values decrease by 10%, a little over 10%. So, you know, the home values decrease. You know, take a $500,000 home, you put 5% down, that's $25K. You get a loan amount of $475. You know, the higher the LTV, the higher your mortgage rate. So you take that $475 home, and let's say you bought it last year, and that $500,000 home, you got 5% down, it goes up in value. You go, you know what, I want to take some cash out. I want to take some cash out. You take cash out, take, let's say 40, 50 grand, you bring your equity down to 5% again, all of a sudden, boom, interest rates go up 1%, a little more, you lose 10+% equity, you're underwater. But here's the other side of it. There's also a lot of people in the markets that I deal in that are cash rich. They got a $5 million house, they owe no money on it. Nothing. They owe no money. They got 50% less to loan value. You know, they're sitting on huge equity. So this is the investor hat. So there's a lot of people with huge equity. And if you got a $5 million house, you owe nothing on it, and you want to take $2.5 million out and buy a 20-unit building, that makes perfect sense to me. You buy a $500,000 house, you only put 5% down. Last year you bought it, it goes up 40, 50,000. You pull that 40, 50,000 out. Now you're back down to a 5% equity stake. All of a sudden interest rates go up. You're underwater. It doesn't make sense to pull cash out. So the people that are way over here, so I'm in the middle. It depends. A lot of people, let's say in Hermosa, Manhattan Beach, just take those areas, in California. Some other areas I know in Wisconsin that we invest in, they're cash rich. They have no mortgages, and they're pulling, let's say, $500,000 out and buying a building for free and clear for cash. It makes sense, and the property's worth, let's say, 1.8 million. Okay, so it depends on the situation. You know what your LTV is. Well, I am of the opinion when you get LTV gets to about 50%, and this happened to me. We are invested horizontally over 90% outside of California. I'm worried about the fundamentals in California right now. I think we are looking for a multifamily. We transition from looking for a single family because the cap rates aren't good. You know, you're getting a single family home, let's say, and you're trying to get, let's say, 18 or 15 to 25,000 rental income. It's hard to find a gentleman or a lady who's going to pay that, and they're on a contract. They lose your job, you're screwed. That's why I love multi-unit. One tenant doesn't pay, you got three others that pick it up in hard times. But in single family, makes sense in certain demographics in certain states over multifamily. But in my opinion, I love California. We need to fix the fundamentals here, and we need to be friendly to small businesses. I'm really worried about what's going on. So we are going to get a multifamily in California, but we are invested horizontally outside the state. Most of our properties are outside of California. We have 3 left. So I think there's some value here in certain markets to get a multi-unit building, and we're going to find the right one. The cap rate's got to be right. But I do believe in cash out. So for example, I took a cash out on a property. I was at 50% or less LTV. I had some good equity in the property. You want to put that property to work for you, and the cap rate's not growing, I can put it somewhere else. So I took some money out. I'm buying a property in Mexico. We're going to add to our portfolio down here. That's why I'm down here right now. We're doing a developmental deal. So I want to get some of my money out of California and put it in other states and other investments. And I had some good equity in this, and I took it out. Now it's, let's say now I still have equity of, let's say, 250, 280K. Makes sense. I'll feel happy if, God forbid, interest rates go up in that value of that property. I won't be underwater, but at least I put that money to use for me. And I'm going to take some of that money. I'm going to buy a property in Mexico, and I'm going to take some of that money and I'm going to put it in the stock market. So I'm putting that money to work for me. I'm not going to buy a car, or go to the Bahamas for a month So cash outs make sense in certain situations. You got to look at your LTV, and if I'm sitting on a hell of a lot of equity and the cap rate's low, I want to put that money to work for me. In other situations, you only put 5% down and you go up in a year and you pull that cash out, now you're back to 5% equity stake, interest rates go up 1%, you're down 10%, you're in trouble. So you got to be smart about in certain situations, cash outs work. So 1/3 of people in 2020 doing cash out refinances, it's safer than 206, but worrisome. So 33% doing cash outs right now. You know, that's a lot. And we'll analyze the data and see what they're using that money for. So we'll see. So it's epic times to be alive, and just don't think one way. Real estate, stocks, do it all. Just be smart about it. It's scary, but exciting times too. And you got to be more creative now than ever. Thanks for your time. Take care.